Let's take a look at leukocytes in a little bit more detail. So leukocytes, as you know, are also called white blood cells. And the reason why they're called white blood cells is because when you take a sample of blood and you put it into a centrifuge, the cells go to the bottom, the red blood cells go to the very bottom, and then on top of the red blood cells is a really thin layer of what they call a white buffy coat, and those are actually the white blood cells. So that's where the name comes from, is because in a centrifuge tube they look white. The main function of leukocytes is defense. So they defend us against bacteria, viruses, parasites, and they even defend us against our own cells when our own cells become virally infected or cancerous. Leukocytes are also important in the process of inflammation. So oftentimes we think of inflammation as a bad thing, but it's actually an important part of the healing process. Inflammation will occur when we have an infection or damage to an area of our body. There are cardinal signs to inflammation. I kind of like the Latin versions: rubor, tumor, calor, dolor. They all kind of rhyme. So rubor is redness, tumor is swelling, calor is heat, and dolor is pain. Some people throw in a fifth sign, which is loss of function. And then some people will swap out pain for itching, especially in dermatology. So inflammation is a process that is going to enhance healing and help to remove pathogens from the area where there's damage or infection. We talk more about inflammation when we get to our section on immune system. So there's 5 types of leukocytes. Let's take a look at each of these different types of leukocytes. Neutrophils are the most common type of leukocyte. Their main job is basically to attack and eat, or what we call phagocytose, bacteria, but they can do some other things too. Eosinophils are one of my favorite white blood cells because they are the white blood cell that can actually defend us against parasites. So I'm going to put a link to a video in our video series that shows you eosinophils working together to attack a worm, right? So you have all of these eosinophils, hundreds of them, that are going to be releasing chemicals out of the surface of this worm to kill it. It's really cool. Basophils. Basophils release chemicals that are going to promote inflammation. And basophils are also the type of leukocyte that's problematic in allergies. There's another cell type called a mast cell, M-A-S-T, and this is not a type of white blood cell. It's actually derived from a different lineage, but the mast cell and the basophil are almost indistinguishable in terms of their structure and their function. So mast cells are also inflammatory and problematic in allergies. One more thing about basophils, I wanted to mention that basophils and mast cells both release 2 major chemicals, histamine and heparin, and you've probably heard of maybe one or both of these. When you're having an allergic reaction or an allergy attack, you often take an antihistamine, right? That's because these basophils and mast cells are releasing histamines, and that's what's causing your nose to run and your eyes to run and your eyes to itch and all that stuff. Histamine is a chemical that causes blood vessels to become leaky. And that makes sense because that's why your nose is running, is because blood vessels in your nose, they get wider, and the permeability of the blood vessel wall increases. Basically, little spaces in the wall get bigger. And so more fluid can leak out of your blood vessels into that tissue, and then it runs down your nose or out your eyes or whatever it is, right? Now, if you have an infection in that area, this process can be really handy for bringing more white blood cells to the area, because the leakier your blood vessels are, the more defensive cells you can bring to that area. Heparin, you've probably heard of this one too. Heparin is a chemical that stops clotting, right? It's an anticoagulant. And that kind of sounds like, well, if I have an injury, why would I want heparin? If you have an injury or infection, you need to get defensive cells to the area, and you need to get things to the area to repair the injury. So sometimes clotting is bad because we use the bloodstream to bring those injury repairing things and those defensive white blood cells to the area. And if it's all clogged up with clots, then you have no way to access that tissue. Monocytes are the largest of the white blood cells. When they're in the bloodstream, we call them a monocyte, but they usually eventually leave the bloodstream, entering into the tissues of the body, where they will aid in defense against things like bacteria. When they enter into the tissues, they differentiate into either a macrophage or a dendritic cell. The difference is really location. Dendritic cells tend to be located in our tissues that have some sort of contact with the external environment, so like mucous membranes or skin, whereas macrophages will be found in other types of tissues. Oh, these cells are also really important for helping to initiate the specific immune response. So when we want to produce antibodies to kill off a specific pathogen, macrophages, specifically in dendritic cells, are going to be important in that process. We talk more about that when we get to the immune system. Last up are the lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are the second most abundant white blood cell next to the neutrophils. And the job of lymphocytes is to take part in the specific immune response. So when we have a particular pathogen in our body, like a specific bacteria or virus in our body, we mount a specific immune response to get rid of that particular pathogen. And the specific immune response is very, very, very efficient and effective. Lymphocytes are the longest lived of all the white blood cells. Typically, a white blood cell will only live for maybe 20 days at the most, but lymphocytes can live for years, sometimes for lifetimes. And that's because some of our lymphocytes end up becoming memory cells that provide us with immunity against diseases throughout our life. There are 3 types of lymphocytes that we'll be talking about in this course, and mostly we talk about them in the immune system section. T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. The T cells and the B cells are going to be very important in that specific immune response. The natural killer cells, however, are not part of the specific immune response. They're actually part of what we call our non-specific defenses. So natural killer cells, unlike T cells and B cells, are not able to recognize a specific bacteria or virus, for example. Instead, natural killer cells are really special. What they can do is they can detect when our own cells are problematic. So they can detect like when our cells are infected with a virus, for example, or when our cells have become cancerous. Detecting when your cells have gone rogue is really hard to do because your immune system is trained to recognize self as self and leave it alone. Because if you killed your self cells indiscriminately, you'd end up with an autoimmune disorder or even be dead. So the natural killer cells are able to detect when the self cells have gone awry, and then they can kill those. So they're really important for keeping us free of cancer or fighting cancer when we have it, or getting rid of cells that are infected with viruses. I just want to talk for a minute about leukocyte movement. Now we know that leukocytes are found in the bloodstream, but many of them, especially the monocytes, are able to leave the bloodstream. So red blood cells, they always stay in the bloodstream unless the blood vessel is broken. But leukocytes can leave the bloodstream and go towards an area of infection or damage. The process of leaving a blood vessel is called emigration or diapedesis. So in the picture on the screen here, you can see some white blood cells squeezing out of a blood vessel. And it's really hard to do this because the cells that make up the wall of the blood vessel are tightly up against each other. And there are tiny spaces between them, and the white blood cell has to squeeze through that tiny space to get out. Because of this, the white blood cell has to have a very flexible cytoskeleton. Once the white blood cell is in the tissue, it uses amoeboid type movement in the tissue to move around. So amoeboid type movement means that the cell puts forth a little bit of its cell membrane with cytoplasm and uses that as a foot to pull the rest of itself along. How does the leukocyte know which direction to go? Chemotaxis. So the white blood cells happen to be able to detect certain chemicals And those chemicals are what are attracting the white blood cells to the area. So when we have some sort of infection, cells in the area will release special chemicals that act as chemotaxins to attract the white blood cells to the area. The last thing I wanted to mention here is just the topic of leukopoiesis. So leukopoiesis is the production of white blood cells. And of course, like all the blood cells, this occurs in the bone marrow. And it starts with the same multipotent hemopoietic stem cell that we use to make our red blood cells. And actually, this is the same cell we're going to use to make platelets too. So there's one like master hemopoietic stem cell in our bone marrow that under the right conditions can differentiate into a basophil or a neutrophil or a red blood cell or a platelet. And it's different chemicals that are going to cause this differentiation process.